In the dust and heat of 1881 Arizona, a broken rancher found a young Apache girl collapsed at his gate, bleeding and barely alive. She whispered 4 words that shattered his isolation. "I can't survive alone." Helping her meant becoming a traitor in the eyes of his town, a town already suspicious of the man who killed in self-defense and chose exile over forgiveness. But he carried her inside anyway. What he didn't know was that in 7 days, an angry mob would arrive at his door with torches and rifles, and the choice he made in that moment would force him to face the past he'd been running from and decide whether survival was worth living for, or if some things were worth dying to protect. Before we dive in, tell us in comments where in the world you are watching from. The sun hadn't fully broken over the Arizona horizon when Thomas Hewitt stepped onto his porch that morning. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. He'd lived alone on this land for 3 years now, and silence had become his only companion. Every dawn looked the same. Every day felt like the last. But this morning was different. Something dark lay crumpled against his fence line, about 50 yards out. At first, he thought it was a coyote, maybe wounded, maybe dead. He grabbed his rifle out of habit and walked closer. The dust crunched beneath his boots. The light grew stronger. And then he saw her. A girl. Apache. No more than 16 years old. She lay on her side, her dark hair matted with dirt and blood. Her dress was torn, her feet bare and blistered. Her breathing was shallow, barely there. Thomas froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't seen another soul in weeks. And now this, a dying girl at his gate. He knelt beside her, and her eyes fluttered open. They were filled with pain, with fear, with something deeper he couldn't name. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and gripped his sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't survive alone." 4 words. That's all it took to shatter the wall he'd built around himself. Thomas looked back at his cabin, then down at her face. Every instinct told him to walk away. Helping her would bring trouble. The town would find out. They always did. And they wouldn't forgive him for harboring an Apache. But her grip tightened. Her eyes pleaded. He made his choice. Thomas lifted her into his arms, light as a wounded bird, and carried her toward the cabin. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows across the land. He didn't know her story. He didn't know what this would cost him. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let her die alone. Thomas laid her on the only bed in the cabin, the one he hadn't slept in since his wife died. He cleaned her wounds with water and cloth, working in silence. Her skin was hot with fever. Her body shook, but she was alive, and that was something. As he worked, memories he'd buried came rushing back. He'd been a soldier once, fought in wars that left scars deeper than flesh. He'd lost his wife to illness 2 winters ago, and when grief made him angry, he'd killed a man in town, self-defense, but the Lord didn't care about details. They called it murder. They called him dangerous. So he left, built this cabin on the edge of nowhere, and told himself he deserved the loneliness. Now, watching this girl fight for breath, he wondered if maybe he'd been punishing himself all along. Over the next 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness. When she finally woke, her eyes were clearer but still haunted. She didn't speak much at first, only fragments. Her name was Iona. Her family had been camped near the border when soldiers came. There'd been gunfire, screaming, blood in the dust. Her father had tried to broker peace with the army, sharing routes and safe passages, hoping to protect the tribe. But others saw it as betrayal. When the raid happened, her own people blamed her family. They said her father's trust had led the soldiers straight to them. She ran, and she'd been running ever since. Thomas listened without judgment. He understood exile. He understood shame that followed you like a shadow, no matter how far you rode. They were both ghosts, haunting the edges of a world that didn't want them. The cabin became a strange kind of sanctuary. She helped where she could, mending torn clothing, stirring pots over the fire, sweeping dust from the corners. He taught her a few English words. She taught him silence could be shared, not just endured. But the peace was fragile. The ranch sat only 12 miles from town, and people talked. They always talked. Thomas knew it was only a matter of time before someone rode out, asking questions. The territory was tense. Apache raids had everyone on edge, and mercy was a luxury no one could afford. He glanced at Iona as she sat by the window, watching the desert stretch endlessly before her. She wasn't leaving, and he wasn't sending her away. But what would the town say when they found out? It took less than 2 weeks for the whispers to reach town. A ranch hand passing through had seen smoke from Thomas's chimney at odd hours. A traveling merchant noticed fresh footprints near the well, small ones, too small to be a man's. Word spread like wildfire through the saloons and general stores. An Apache was living on Hewitt's land, and people were afraid. On a cold afternoon, Thomas saw the dust cloud rising in the distance. Riders, 6 of them. He recognized the sheriff's horse at the front, flanked by ranchers he'd once called neighbors. They came to a stop outside his fence, their faces hard, their hands resting near their holsters. The sheriff dismounted first, a man named Clayton with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. "Thomas," he said, his voice even but firm. "We need to talk." Thomas stepped off the porch, his arms crossed. "Then talk. There's an Apache girl here. That true?" Thomas didn't flinch. "She's here." A murmur rippled through the group. One of the ranchers, a man named Briggs, spat into the dust. "You got any idea what you're doing, Hewitt? Apache's killed 3 families last month. Burned down the Johnsons' homestead. And you're keeping one under your roof." "She's a child," Thomas said quietly. "Not a raider." "Doesn't matter," Briggs shot back. "Her people are the enemy. You harbor her. You're a traitor." The sheriff raised a hand, silencing Briggs. "Thomas, I understand you got a kind heart. But this isn't about kindness. It's about safety, loyalty. People in town are scared, and they got a right to be. You turn her over to us, or you send her on her way. Those are your options." Thomas's jaw tightened. "She's not going anywhere." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The men exchanged glances. Clayton shook his head slowly. "Then you're making yourself a problem." "I've been a problem before," Thomas replied. "Didn't kill me then. Won't kill me now." Briggs stepped forward, his voice rising. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a fool protecting the enemy. We'll give you 7 days, Hewitt. 7 days to make her leave. After that, we come back, and we won't be asking nicely." The riders turned and left, their horses kicking up trails of dust. Thomas stood there long after they disappeared, his fists clenched, his heart pounding. Inside the cabin, Iona had been listening. She emerged slowly, her face pale. "They want me gone," she said in halting English. "They want a lot of things," Thomas muttered. She sat on the porch step beside him, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, she began to tell him more. Her father had believed in peace. He'd met with soldiers, shared maps, tried to find common ground. He thought trust could save lives, but trust had gotten him killed. Her mother, her brothers, all of them, gone, and the tribe blamed them for it. "They say my father betray," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But he only stop the killing." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and saw himself. Another person punished for trying to do the right thing. Another exile carrying the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Over the following days, the contrast between their quiet life and the storm brewing in town became unbearable. Iona mended his torn shirts, cooked simple meals, tended the small garden behind the cabin. She was resilient, strong in ways he hadn't expected. She smiled sometimes, a rare and fragile thing. But Thomas knew the clock was ticking. 7 days. He watched her wake, watched her try to build something out of nothing, and he made a decision. He wasn't sending her away, not to face the desert alone, not to face her own people who'd already cast her out, not to face men like Briggs who saw her as nothing more than a threat. He'd made his choice the moment he carried her through his door, and he'd stand by it, no matter what it cost. On the 5th night, Thomas sat on the porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like broken glass. Iona joined him, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You never tell me," she said softly, "why you live alone." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. I killed a man, he said. 3 years ago. He came at me in town, drunk, angry about something I can't even remember. He drew his gun first. I was faster. The law called it self-defense. But the people, they didn't care. They saw what they wanted to see. A killer. A man who couldn't be trusted. So I left. Built this place. Told myself I deserved to be alone. Ayanna listened, her face unreadable in the dim light. I ran too, she whispered. After my family died, there was a man, a trader. He said he'd help us. My father trust him. Give him information. Routes. Places we camp. The trader, he tell the soldiers. And they come. Her voice cracked. I trust him. I bring him to my father. It is my fault they die. Thomas turned to her, his expression pained. It's not your fault. You were a kid. You didn't know. And you, she asked. You defend yourself. You didn't know the town would hate you. The truth settled between them like dust. They'd both been running from guilt that wasn't truly theirs to carry. They'd both been living as prisoners, punishing themselves for surviving when others didn't. Ayanna's voice was small, fragile. Will you send me away? Thomas didn't answer with words. He stood, walked to the shed, and began pulling out tools. Hammers, nails, boards. He started reinforcing the fence, checking the locks on the cabin doors, stacking firewood near the entrance. His movements were deliberate, purposeful. Ayanna watched for a moment, then rose and joined him. She carried planks, held nails, worked beside him without hesitation. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The message was clear. They were preparing for a stand. The night air was cool, charged with quiet intensity. The work was hard, but it felt like something more than survival. It felt like defiance, like choosing each other when the world demanded they stay apart. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher. Finally, Ayanna paused, wiping sweat from her brow. She looked at Thomas, her eyes searching his face. Why do you fight for me? She asked. Thomas set down his hammer. He met her gaze, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than loneliness. Because no one fought for me, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a silent promise. They returned to their work, side by side, two exiles building something neither had thought possible, a home worth defending. They came on the seventh night, just as promised. Thomas saw the torches first, flickering like angry stars moving through the darkness. Then came the sound, horses, boots, voices low and tense. At least a dozen men. The sheriff was there, but this wasn't law. This was a mob. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed down. Ayanna stood beside him, her chin raised, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. The crowd stopped at the fence line. Briggs was at the front, his face twisted with contempt. The sheriff hung back, his expression conflicted. 7 days, Hewitt, Briggs called out. Time's up. Send her out, or we take her. Thomas didn't move. His voice was calm, cold. You're not taking anyone. You're gonna shoot us all, someone shouted from the back. I'm asking you to listen, Thomas said, louder now. You want her gone because you're afraid. I understand that. Fear makes sense out here, but fear also makes cowards. It makes good people do terrible things. You talk about survival, about loyalty, about protecting your families. But what you're doing right now, this isn't protection. This is cruelty dressed up as justice. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the ground. I've lived afraid, Thomas continued, his voice breaking slightly. I've lived alone because I thought I deserved it. But fear didn't save me. It just made me small. And it'll do the same to you. Briggs spat. We don't need a sermon from a traitor. Before Thomas could respond, Ayanna stepped forward. Her voice was soft but clear, each word carefully chosen. My father, he tried to make peace, she said, her English halting but strong. He trusts the wrong man. The soldiers come. They kill my mother, my brothers, my father. They're my own people. They blame us. Say we betray the tribe. I have no home, no family. I am alone. Her voice wavered but didn't break. I do not want to hurt you. I only want to live." Silence fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Some of the men looked away. Others whispered to each other, doubt creeping into their eyes. But Briggs pushed forward, his hand moving toward his gun. "Enough of this. Stop." The voice was sharp, commanding. An old woman stepped through the crowd, her gray hair tied back, her eyes fierce. It was Mrs. Callahan, the town's school teacher, a woman everyone respected. "You should be ashamed," she said, looking directly at Briggs. "All of you. This girl is a child, and you're acting like animals." She turned to the sheriff. "Clayton, you know this is wrong." The sheriff's shoulders sagged. He looked at Thomas, then at Iona, then back at the crowd. "She's right," he said quietly. "This isn't who we are." The mob began to fracture. Men turned away, murmuring, the fire draining from their eyes. Briggs cursed under his breath, but even he knew the moment was broken. One by one, they left. The torches faded into the night. Thomas and Iona stood on the porch, watching until the last rider disappeared. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. He'd won, but the cost was clear. He was truly an outcast now. Weeks passed, and the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Iona was no longer a guest. She was family. In the mornings, Thomas taught her to read, tracing letters in the dust with a stick, sounding out words from an old Bible his wife had left behind. In the evenings, she taught him Apache words: sky, water, home. Her voice patient as he stumbled through the unfamiliar sounds. They worked the land together, side by side, planting, mending, building. The town kept its distance, and that was fine. The threat had passed, but the wounds remained. Thomas knew he'd never be welcomed back, and he found he didn't care. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together on the porch. No words were needed. The land stretched before them, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving but theirs. Iona walked to the fence and pulled out a small knife. She began carving something into the wood, a symbol, deliberate and careful. Thomas watched, curiosity flickering in his eyes. When she finished, she stepped back. It was simple, two figures, side by side. Permanence, belonging, a claim to a place in a world that had tried to deny them both. Thomas smiled faintly, something he hadn't done in years. Survival, he'd learned, wasn't about strength. It wasn't about fighting alone or enduring in silence. It was about refusing to be alone when the world demanded it. It was about choosing each other, even when it cost everything. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness settled over the ranch. But inside, a light still burned. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone stay.